Hey, what's up, guys? You're now listening to Devo with Uncle Theo. Today is day 131, and we're in a new book. We're going to cover First Chronicles chapters 1 and 2. Now, I don't know how I'm going to do this, but First and Second Chronicles is basically a regurgitation of everything we've covered before, just from a different perspective. And so it's like reading the gospel, how you would read Matthew and Mark and Luke. And a lot of that is a lot of the same material, just from a different vantage point, from a different perspective, or written to a different audience. So they have a different aim and different terminology. Well, that's kind of how First and Second Chronicles. Chronicles is written later than Kings because it actually includes how Israel comes out of exile. So we'll get that here. But one thing Chronicles is going to do is going to emphasize and highlight God's love and relationship with his people. Literally, Chronicles God's love for his people. So remember this, Kings is horizontal, but Chronicles is vertical. And so these are the good times, so to speak. It omits a lot of the bad parts. You'll see some bad in Chronicles, but it edits out a lot of the bad and the sin of the Kings because you've seen that already in Kings. So Chronicles is going to show more of the good parts. And so it's two things that we'll have to look at as we're going through this book. One thing you'll see is that always remember corporate solidarity. The king is a microcosm of his people. And secondly, always pay attention to the temple. In the book of Kings, the temple stood for hope. It stood for God. It stood for his presence and how he was going to change the world. It was a symbol of God's relationship with his people. And so think of the temple as the status of how God's relationship is with Israel and how Israel's relationship is with God. We need to look at that at all times. Look at what the king is doing with the temple. If he's deconstructing it, that means bad things are happening. But if he's reconstructing it, that means good things are happening. And so we're going to cover chapters 1 and 2 today. And they're going to start with, guess what? A genealogy. And you got to remember what we've learned. God is using genealogies in his favor because he started out in Genesis 3:15 saying that there'll be enmity between his seed and the seed of Satan. And so he's always going to stop every time in a new generation or with a new author or a new writer to track his genealogy so you, one, can distinguish it from the seed of Satan, and two, so you can understand where the seed of God is going and that we're getting closer and closer to the Messiah. We're winnowing it down. We saw it wasn't Adam. We saw it wasn't Abraham. We saw it wasn't Isaac. We saw it wasn't Jacob. We saw it wasn't Judah. We saw it wasn't Joseph. We saw it wasn't Moses. We saw it wasn't David or Solomon or Hezekiah or Josiah. But we're getting closer and closer every time we read. And so feel that intensity picking up. And that's what we're looking at today. We're looking at a genealogy. So when you see a genealogy, I know you're not going to go chase every name and study it, but in your head, just say, wow, God is faithful. Look at this generational faithfulness of God. You understand that it begins with Adam. And think about this. In the Hebrew Bible, guess what the last book is of their Bible? Because a Jew wouldn't take the New Testament as canonical. We do as Christians, obviously, but they reject Christ. But our faith started from them. And get this, Chronicles is the last book of their Bible. And they trace God's faithfulness from Adam to his people here today. And you may say, yeah, Theo, I see you hyping it up, but this stuff is boring. But it's boring because faithfulness is boring. You keep hearing the same thing over and over. That should encourage you. That means God has established a pattern so much to the point that it bores you. Be encouraged by that your God is so faithful that it's boring because he keeps doing the same thing over and over. And that's showing loving kindness, faithfulness, grace, and mercy to his people. He doesn't change. And so you're calling it boring because he's predictable and has a clear track record and pattern. But God calls it faithfulness, and we should be just like him. So don't be bored by this. Actually make it devotional. And this shows you that God, you see the faithfulness of God in your life. He hadn't just been faithful to you. He's been faithful all throughout human history, all the way from Adam. He's been He isn't just sustaining your family and all the families of the world today. He's been sustaining families since the garden, since Adam. And that's what Chronicles is reminding us of. When we look in chapter 1, it starts off by saying Adam, Seth, Enosh, Kenan, Mahalalel, Jared, Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech, Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And just like the Table of Nations showed us, this is an abbreviated genealogy that summarizes redemptive history. One from Adam to Noah in verses 1 through 4, then from Noah's son Shem to Abraham, verses 4 through 27, then from Jacob to the 12 tribes, verses 134 through 2:2, and then from the 12 tribes to those who had returned to Jerusalem from the 70-year captivity. And that's going to be chapters 2 through chapter 9. And this is a listing of God's faithfulness. It's showing his love to his people, and you're getting it chronicled to you. And we pick up some of those. We talked about how Cush came from Ham and Mizraim, that's Egypt. You have Put in Canaan, and the Ethiopian people flow from Cush, the Cushites, the Ethiopians. And you have through Shem, the Abrahamic line coming through, which is where we develop Hebrew from. And it says in verse 27, Abram, that is Abraham. You get the genealogy in verse 28. The sons of Abraham were Isaac and Ishmael, and these are the genealogies of both of those sons. And in verse 2, it picks up with the 12 sons of Israel. You remember how they came about. It's been a long time since we talked about it, but sin brought about the 12 tribes. Remember how Rachel and Leah were warring against each other, trying to have a baby making contest, and God pops out the 12 tribes of Israel through that. And so in verse 1, you have Israel. These are the sons of Israel: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Dan, Joseph, Benjamin, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. And from verses 9 throughout the end of the chapter, you get the genealogy of David. And we're going to flow next time through the family of David. So in chapter 2, verse 7, it says the son of Carmi was Achar. That's another rendering for Achan, the troubler of Israel, who violated the ban. Remember, the second generation got their first casualties because Achan stole the bacon, because Achan was aching to steal something, and he's exposed and he's killed because of it. And they start the conquest again. But you get all of these names that we've seen before, like Ram, Aminadab, Nation, Caleb. Remember Caleb, who took the land with Joshua, and he inherited the very land that he spied out and trusted God with. And it flows from Caleb all the way through the end of the chapter. What God is doing, he's setting you up for the Davidic line, because we're about to talk more in depth about the family of David and the Davidic line. And I'm going to keep naming these now. Before long, you're going to remember at least 5 or 6 of these kings from both nations. Let that be your goal. At least remember this. Remember that there's one dynasty in the southern kingdom, and there are multiple dynasties in the northern kingdom, because none of them ever trust God. The only glimpse of a good king we get is Jehu, when he busts up the Umrah conspiracy and kind of set things in order, and God promised him 4 sons. But outside of that, we don't have any stability in the northern kingdom. And so there are multiple dynasties there. But remember, there are 20 kings on both sides. And because we're going to cover Judah extensively in Chronicles, I'm going to name those and we'll close out. After the wrong king Saul, we go to David, then we go to Solomon. His house is divided between Rehoboam and Jeroboam. So Rehoboam is of the tribe of Judah. That's his son. Remember, Jeroboam is Solomon's servant, which forms the northern kingdom. So we have Solomon, Rehoboam, Abijah, Asa, Jehoshaphat, Jehoram, Ahaziah, Athaliah, Joash, Amaziah, Azariah, Jotham, Ahaz, Hezekiah, Manasseh, Ammon, Josiah, Jehoahaz, Jehoiakim, Jehoiachin, and Zedekiah, that last one who was an imposter. And you'll see in Matthew 1 the name Jeconiah, and that's another rendering for Jehoiachin. So start to fall in love with these genealogies, because God isn't just faithful to you because he started with faithfulness and learned about it when he met you. He's faithful to you because he's been faithful since Adam, since Genesis. Grow in that and learn that about him. So when you ever doubt his faithfulness, you don't have to just look to your experiences. You can look to the experiences of all those who came before you, and you will have a deep wellspring to draw from and to be encouraged at all times, because God is faithful. You guys take care. Catch you next time.
Yeah.